Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey, and this is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what's up, man? What are we talking about today?
Today, we have got a transgender professor competing in children's swim meets in Barrie. We've also got Canada's state-sponsored media extending its reach. The Liberals mandating separate hiring targets for Black and LGBT plus workers, as well as talking about whether the American dream is a thing of the past. So, let's get into it. So, thought we might start off hot here. A 50-year-old biological male who identifies as transgender competed against teenage girls in a recent swim meet held in Barrie, Ontario. Melody Weishart, formerly known as Nicholas Sapita, a biological male identifying as female, took part in the Trojan Cup competition that spanned from December 1st to 3rd. The event featured female competitors aged 8 to 16, and Weishart was listed as Phelps Weishart, representing the Orangeville Otters Swim Club. Despite attempts by parents to shield their children from the situation, Weishart reportedly utilized the female change room where young girls were present. Concerns were raised among parents who found the situation confusing for their children and considered it inappropriate for Weishart to not only compete against, but also share locker room facilities with their kids. The Toronto Sun reported that parents had expressed discomfort, stating, quote, "It's all so confusing for the kids. No one is comfortable. Everybody is accepting of all people, but them swimming against our kids and being in the locker room with them is not appropriate." Weishart, a professor in the psychology department at York University, who is married to a woman, had previously participated in the Richmond Hill Aquatic Center's Fall Classic in October, where competitors were reported to be 13 and 14 years old. Swimming Canada's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion policy states the organization's commitment to the full participation of all of individuals in their programs and activities, irrespective of various factors, including gender identity and expression. Go.
I just try to wonder what happened in society where we started treating this sort of mental illness like it had to be protected, like it's okay. Now, where are the parents in all this is kind of my first big question. If I had kids there, there's a couple things I'd be doing. First of all, I'd be boycotting the swim event. I'd be telling everybody there's no chance we're doing this. I'd stop everybody from actually jumping in the pool to just basically boycott or protest against this kind of behavior. Because here's the thing, up until recently, if you were transgender, they considered it a mental disorder. Now, I'm on the fence. I don't care how people want to see this. But this guy, girl, whatever, is a university professor at York University in the psychology department. That whole thing, and now he decides that he's going to be a woman. Fine. That actually on its own, I don't have a real big issue with that. If that's what you want to do, fine, go ahead. But when you start engaging in this behavior where you are now pretending that you're a 13-year-old girl, well, that's getting really strange. So now that's definitely, now you're in the mental disorder waters, 100%.
So, I mean, to think about disorder just means something not functioning as it's supposed to.
Right.
So you think about if you're born in, quote unquote, the wrong body, that is a disorder by definition.
For sure.
And this whole idea is that the language is stigmatizing. So, but like, are we supposed to pretend that this is normal? Like, I mean, that's your option. It's either disorder or it's normal.
Well,
I don't think this is normal.
I think they're fighting to make this kind of stuff normal, which is what creeps me the fuck out. And so this is where this becomes a really big problem for me, is where this person decides that they're a 13-year-old girl, they're going to go to a swim meet, which is somehow protected and acceptable, which I don't understand whatsoever. And then they're going to use the change rooms and the showers with these little girls. So this is pedophilia, this is predatory, this is 100% wrong. I don't understand how our institutions got to a point where we not only condone it, but we protect it. You know what I mean? There's no way for 99.9% of the country who don't agree with this that they can do anything about it. All these organizations, like you said, Swim Canada is like, well, we're just following the rules. How did this become a rule? How did this become acceptable at all? This is predatory. And, there'd be a small argument I guess you could have. Maybe. I would disagree with it, but you could maybe argue, well, this person's into maybe men. And I still disagree with this. But I could almost see that as being like, yeah, this person's has a mental disorder for sure. They're into men. So maybe you don't think it's quite as predatory. Maybe. But this person is still into women. So this is totally fucked up for me. There's no way that this is okay in any way, shape, or form. And it's what has happened because of this liberal ideology? It's just continued to go further and further and further down the line where it's gotten insane. And I don't know what people are supposed to do to push back against it. You know what I mean? So for me, go ahead.
Or I was just going to say, to your point about saying that we have to also pretend that this person is 13, this has been my point from the beginning, is this concept that men can be women and women can be men, it tears apart the fabric of reality, because if that is the argument that, okay, this person is now a woman and we must treat her that way, there's actually more biological markers for that person's sex and gender than there is for their age. Like age, or like time in and of itself, is a very human construct. So if I can't argue that this person isn't what they claim to be, then how can I effectively argue against them being 13? You can't.
No, I mean, the whole thing is broken. What I don't understand is why we're jamming this charade down the country's throat, because it's fucking nonsense. And the reality is, like, the reality is this is not reality. We're not playing in reality anymore. It's just a make-believe game where we're letting these mentally ill people think about what this is doing to children. Think about what that's doing to children. I mean, I talked to my wife about this. She's like, I'd be in that fucking locker room with that dude in a full-out fist fight if my daughter was in there. There's no chance. And that's actually, that's one of the things I'm surprised about, is that no other parents really got up in arms about it. They're like, oh, we're uncomfortable. Where are you for your kids right now? Stand up, do something. Because look, if this kind of stuff keeps happening and no one stands up and pushes back, how does it ever come to an end? And the answer is it doesn't. You need to stand up. You need to push back against these regulatory bodies, this Swim Canada. You need to push back against any of the politicians that champion to put this stuff in place, and they need to repeal it. We need a little bit of sensibility here, because this is where it's gotten, where a 50-year-old man who dates women or is married to a woman can now walk into in a change room with an 8-year-old and shower and get changed in that space. That is pedophilia. Why are we condoning this? Sorry, I don't even care what their intentions are. This is 100% wrong, and it's scarring to kids. You know what I mean? You got some strange man with his dick out, and you're 8 years old trying to go to a swim meet. This is scarring groups of kids. There is no good thing. There's nothing here is okay about this. And I think that we need a more organized effort from everybody to start saying, we've had enough. We need to push back whenever we see it happening. We need to start organizing ourselves so that we're pushing back against policy, even when it's not happening. And if people do, our politicians are elected, kind of. And if they don't start towing these lines, they need to be removed. Look, I've said this before. If you want your institutions to work, you have to work for your institutions. And this is exactly why more Canadians need to get involved in this shit, because this is now what's happening to our kids, the original protected class.
So this is the thing, too, that I see happening with this whole agenda, where we're supposed to pretend as if we don't understand that there is something called autogynephilia, which is...
A lot of people don't know what that is, actually.
So what it is this has been studied for a very long time. Men that get sexually aroused at the idea of presenting themselves as female, of dressing up, and this is, you could say that this is your whole drag movement, all of that kind of stuff. So this has been well documented for a very long time. And my whole point on the transgender stuff is there is definitely gender dysphoria, where what we know about it, going back to this, really got started being studied in the 1990s. And it was predominantly young men who would be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. And so just to look at how the switch of demographics has taken place here, where I don't think that a lot of this stuff falls under typical gender dysphoria or transgenderism or any of this kind of thing, where we now have people say that would be have autogynephilia or these other mental disorders, putting themselves under the umbrella of transgenderism as essentially a cloak, because they see it as a protected class right now.
That's what it is.
And so to put it into perspective, how these demographics are shifting. So in the 1990s, when GIDS, which was the Gender Identity Development Services in the UK, which has since been shut down because of how badly these operations went and lawsuits started getting thrown against them, the caseload was 75% male. But by 2015, 65% of patients were female. So everything that we know about this mental condition has just been flipped on its head. And we also know that young adolescent girls are very impressionable in their in puberty stages. So be uncomfortable with their bodies,
Right.
all of these kind of things. There's so many things getting wrapped up into this transgender ideology. I made a post the other day that transgender ideology has done to the autism community what crack in the CIA did to the black community. Where, like, so to put it into perspective too, there's 2% of the population is autistic. 2% of the population is autistic, but 30% of transgender kids getting care are autistic. So there's a massive discrepancy here that's going on. And so only 2.5% of young people going into JIDs had no associated problems, whereas 70% of the patients had at least 5 associated problems. And that includes things like severe harassment, physical abuse, anxiety, school attendance issues, self-harming behaviors, and quote, inappropriately sexualized behavior. So these are very troubled people that are now being given this one-size-fits-all
Well, it's actually a reward.
narrative.
They're getting a reward. They're getting a safety blanket and a reward for being there, which also incentivizes people that may be on the fence or maybe in these other more nefarious groups to jump on board, and that's where they can kind of execute whatever their interest is, which is so wild.
And I was just listening to The Madness of Crowds by Douglas Murray,
Yeah,
and he made a really good point in that book. For anybody who is unaware of Douglas Murray, he's a gay reporter from the UK, so he kind of has a little bit of a shield when he enters into these realms. But he was saying we're now up to the acronym being 2S LGBTQIA+, where they call this a community. But what is a community? A community is a group of people that share a physical space or have shared characteristics. So a lot of people would think that this falls under the second portion of that definition, which is they have shared characteristics. Yeah. But Douglas Murray goes on to point out as like, what do these people have in common with one another? Lesbians and gays historically and famously don't like each other. Yeah. Like lesbians typically think of gays as silly, immature. Gays think of lesbians as prudish. Then you put in bis, who both lesbians and gays are skeptical of because they think they're fence sitters or probably trying to hold on to some sense of normalcy instead of just
committing.
Sure. And then you have trans people who think that they're a different gender than the one their body gave them or whatever. So what does somebody's gender have to do with their proposed sexuality? Like a man,
they're very different things.
What does a man who thinks he's a woman have in common with a man that likes another man?
They're very different things. I remember one thing actually Murray said, which was kind of funny. He goes, you put an asexual next to a gay guy, you couldn't have two people that were further apart from being having anything in common.
Exactly.
I'm just like, like it's for me, what's happening, I'm not really too sure why, but the liberals, Democrats, however you want to look at it, have kind of built this protected class that continues to expand more and more and more. And it's only under their umbrella that they think these people are safe. And as they continue to expand it, they're just sort of, I believe that they're doing it on purpose so that they can scale their operation. They can scale their support. And it gives like their big thing is equality. But the problem is, do you see that thing in Boston the other day? That mayor who had it was a non-white party.
Oh yes,
so
I did see that.
There were like city workers. So they sent out an email to all these city workers, and they included the white people. Then they responded like, "Oh shit, sorry, white people, you're not invited. This is only for colored people. You can't come out." And then people don't complain too much. A couple of the white people that were ministers in the office or whatever they did, they're like, "Look, my skin's thicker than that. I don't really care." But one of them goes, "Imagine that was a white guy doing an all-white party. How do you think that's going to go?" And I'm like, look, I don't really care about anything like that. I just want to identify that to say, like, they're building these different protected groups, right? And then all the protected groups are under the Democratic umbrella, but they've ostracized too many white people. So what they've done, in my opinion, is they've created this expanded LGBTQ community to include all these people. Like, look at all these non-binary 17-year-old boys just because they want to fit in. But now they've given them an umbrella to live under, so that they're also a part of a protected class. So they also kind of come under the fold of maybe the democratic or liberal ideology. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I realize that's a rather simplistic view given sort of the complexity of the entire group of people. But if I'm looking at it from a macro perspective as a political leader, that's why I would build something like this. And I think that's a big reason why it's happened. I just think it's gotten out of control with this stupid 50-year-old man changing with little girls.
Well, and I think one of the most effective things that the people that push for these narratives do is it's called a Mott and Bailey debate tactic. So what a Mott and Bailey is how they used to construct castles and landing zones in medieval times. So you can think of your Bailey as your easily defendable position. It's your castle on top of the hill, your high ground, and then you've got your attack position, which is the low ground where you go and fight your battles. So what they do is they put forward a hard to defend position, which is something like going against free speech laws. Like, you have to refer to me as XYZ. And then anytime you push back against that and attack them back, or they feel threatened, they retreat to their high ground, which is, well, we just want to fit in. We just want to be accepted. But then they go, and then as soon as you go, okay, cool. And like us being very libertarian minded people would be like, yep, you're free to do whatever you want. And then as soon as we get off the back pedal, they go back to their attack position and start enforcing it, going, yeah, but my freedom and my ability to be who I am requires you to act a certain way. So and I think that's where and I said something the other day too, where it's like, don't extend generosity and tolerance to people who will weaponize it against you. Like, we have to put our foot down, especially in this topic where we're told that we can't even have an opinion on it, that it's equivalent to essentially identity murder or whatever.
Whatever, bro. Like,
it's just
I'm a bigot. Cool.
Like,
I don't think a dude should change with little girls. Fuck off.
Yeah. And it's just like, I think we just need to start putting our foot down and just be like, look, there's no more wiggle room here. And I don't think these people even have the moral high ground, because if you actually look into
this is so far out of control.
They're not helping kids either.
I think there was a quote in there that's like, no one is comfortable. Nobody here is comfortable anymore. There's no gray area here. This is black and white, and it's wrong. So I agree with you. Like, we need to, as I said earlier, we need to mobilize. People need to get ready to start pushing back constantly when it does happen and when it's not happening through policy, and replace people that are not willing to fix this fucking problem.
And there's a fantastic book called Time to Think by Hannah Barnes, who's a BBC reporter, and you can tell she's actually left wing, and you can tell when she does interviews and podcasts, she's so scared to say something that could get her attacked or called her transphobic.
That's crazy.
And actually, to her point, in her book, so she would talk about something, and then she would give then the next chapter would be a story of a transgender person that she talked with. Okay. Some say that these surgeries and hormone treatments were night and day help. Others say that they weren't given the proper information. So you can tell that it's a very complex thing, but she does a very good job of highlighting the stories of some people who may have been helped by these procedures. But one thing she points out in that book is that 90% of the young girls going in for hormone treatments are same-sex attracted, meaning they're attracted to other women. And then it's 82% of the young boys going in for it are also same-sex attracted. And there was actually a practitioner at that clinic named Anna Hutchinson who continually was trying to warn the uppers of JIDs that they were chemically castrating gay kids. Yeah. They're like, these kids are confused. They're stepping into these puberty zones where they're starting to have, they're essentially opening up to the idea of sexuality, and they're realizing that they don't fit into these traditional ideas of straight or whatever. And we're telling them that means that they're in the wrong body. Which
is so weird, because for so many years what we did was we tried to push acceptance for it to be okay that people were lesbian or gay. And now we're telling you, well, if you feel like you're a lesbian, you probably just want to be a man, which is such a distorting thing. Like, it goes against all of the work they did within that particular space. So it doesn't even make any sense. It seems counterproductive.
And that's going back to even just saying how, like, I don't see how these people are a community. It's like, I can't call that a community when I think the T's are a direct threat to the L's and the G's.
Right.
You're like, they're like, oh man. And it goes even further when you realize that the quote unquote hormone blockers they use are the exact same medications that they use to chemically castrate sex offenders, and that they forced down the throats of gay people like Alan Turing way back in the day.
Yeah, when he committed suicide.
It's
so
the
like,
exact
are we
same
sure this is the right
drugs.
thing? And what's crazy to me is they're saying there's no negative side effects here. You can just come off them and everything's going to be okay. I'm like, guys, you can't disturb puberty with chemicals to stifle it, and then nothing's going to happen. That is not how it works. Like, it's just the thing is, that's such simple, basic biology and science, and we know the answers to these things, but they're allowed to say this stuff, and again, nobody's accountable. It's such a wild thing, man. I feel like a lot of people in the world right now are just being used as crash test dummies for this wild, insane ideology to just push political narratives and create sort of momentum behind these groups for other reasons. You know what I mean? Like, it seems like they're using this group to defend themselves in other areas because they want support on the Democratic side of things. And I know, look, I don't mean to just put down Democrats all the time. It's not my intention. And when it's just like, if you look at the situation, that's where it's coming from. That's where the problem has started. Those are the people that are pushing this problem. And I don't think that Republicans or conservatives always have the right answers for these sort of things either. I think there's nuance to it, and I think there's a bit of a gray area. But the realm that it's currently living in is completely unsafe, especially for the people that are involved in it. And I think they don't realize.
All right. Well, let's move on to the next story here. So Canada's state-sponsored media extends its reach. Google must inject $100 million annually into Canadian media for allowing their news content to be displayed through its series of digital networks, primarily Google Search. Until recently, the government proposed that nearly 75% of these funds go to public broadcasters like Bell Media and CBC Radio Canada. However, now the Liberal government has a new plan. The lion's share of the money, 63%, will go to newspapers and digital media platforms, with broadcasters receiving only 30% and CBC capped at 7%. Despite the substantial drop in funds allocated for the CBC, critics argue that this number should be $0 because they are taking lifeline funds away from small private media companies who do not receive $1.2 billion in annual federal funding. The Heritage Minister defended the decision, stating that excluding the public broadcaster entirely would devalue its essential role. So let me ask you, what do you think the CBC's essential role is?
Taking $1.2 billion worth of taxpayer money and doing absolutely nothing with it. Like, just, it's a state-sponsored, state-controlled media outlet, right? They're out of touch with what people want to watch on TV. They have not migrated to the digital realm very well at all. In general, they're just used as a megaphone for the government. That's really all it is. And it's been like that for a really long time, whether there's conservatives or Democrats or liberals rather in power. The difference really being that Trudeau gives them an extra $120 to $150 million a year than conservatives had. And they're doing whatever they can to make sure that they stay afloat because they think it's such a crucial component to Canadian culture. But really, again, it's how they control the mainstream media. But if you kind of look at how funds are dispersed by the government to a lot of these platforms, I don't think enough people realize that every major news outlet, every major mainstream news outlet is one way or another subsidized by the government. Even the ones that they're considered like right-wing. Like, they say, I was reading something the other day, I think they said CTV was like center-right. I'm like, what the fuck world do you live in? You know, National Post was far-right. I'm like, National Post is moderate at best. But these guys are all subsidized by the government. And look, the issue you have with this is pretty clear. When the government's funding media, the media has a bias because the media wants to continue getting funded. And when you live in this new realm where they are not making as much money off ad dollars because they're not migrating well into the digital space, they become more and more dependent on the government. So when that happens, they have to toe the line of the government. Like, I was going to say, they have to toe the government's line stronger than before, essentially, right? Now, when you look at what's happening here, it's actually a smart strategic move from Trudeau, because they're already handing out billions of dollars to mainstream media platforms. Why would you give them another 100 million, right? So you think about mainstream media, and they're like sort of this, like the highway of information, right? So the government owns the highway of information, right? But you have all these side streets that are below it that people like you and I live on, right? You and I are more back alley, but you know what I mean. So if you just give more money to the highway you already control, what are you really accomplishing? And the answer is really not much, right? Especially 100 million. That's peanuts to guys that are getting 1.2, 1.3 from the government. So they took this 100 million, and what they're doing now is they're dispersing it to all these other platforms through a specific fund, and you have to apply for it. And when you apply for this, you have to get government approval, right? And who is the government that's approving it? The Liberal government. So what they're doing is now they're using this 100 million. Well, they're using 63 million of it actually to basically fill the side streets with all their media. So what they're doing is they're filling all the cracks, in my opinion, so that the entire narrative from the highway through the side streets on the on and off ramps and everything is going to kind of be this liberal powerhouse that is paid by the government that's going to continue pushing whatever their agenda is. You know what I mean? And the problem with that is, look, a lot of times news is just news. But we also know that probably 30 to 40% of the time, it's really politically motivated. And when you've only got one side of a story being told, you're not getting the whole truth. And like, I always implore people to find other sources than me too. Like I have a bias. You have a bias. We all do. It's fine. But what they're doing with this is they're fortifying the bias that this country is going to have towards liberals and to the liberal agenda. And they're squashing a lot of the other voices sort of in the conservative realm. The thing is, you need opposing voices. When you have ideas that aren't great, you need people to come to the table with better ideas, and you need to kind of negotiate, find some common ground, and that's what's better for the people. But we're not allowing that. And my concern runs pretty deep here, actually. Like, first of all, I think it's a very authoritarian move that I don't think people are identifying because it doesn't really affect them right now. It doesn't feel like that, but that's what it is. When the state controls all of the media, that's totalitarian. That's pretty wild. And that's kind of where we're going with this. And this $63 million a year that's just coming out of Google's pocket will go a long way to fortify those side streets, because there's not nearly as much money in that space. Like you and I, we're not making that kind of money. I'm not making any money doing this. So if you can fund a group with $63 million, they can just keep going whether they're making money or not. You can basically just keep pushing your messaging. So for me, it's a pretty dangerous thing that's happening. It's a smart strategic move from Trudeau, but it does put the conservatives at a disadvantage because obviously they can't get their voice out. And then when you look at some of the censorship tools that are being used on social media, now it's even harder to get your voice out if you're conservative, because those are all unpopular opinions, so they all need to be censored. But here's the thing. How does this play out in the next election? And for me, this is actually one of the key things that is going to give Trudeau a chance to win again in 2025. He's controlling the mainstream media. He's going to be controlling all the side street media platforms as well. And he's going to be censoring all of the conservative speech. So I think this is pretty concerning. But again, I got to tip my hat to the guy because it's a smart move to keep him in power.
Yeah. And see, it's funny because I am definitely biased, but I'm not. It's so crazy to me that I've been put in this box of conservative when my values haven't changed much since I was a young teenager. And I would definitely consider myself a liberal, like a classic liberal. Like the definition of liberalism is a political and moral philosophy based on the rights of the individual, liberty, consent of the governed, political equality, right to private property, and equality before the law. This new idea of liberalism, or our current Liberal Party, all of this, they go directly against all of those things. They're all about group rights. They're not about individual rights at all. They're actually trying to strip away individual rights in the name of affording group rights. They're not to the idea of free enterprise and all of this kind of stuff. They want the government to be involved in every single aspect of the economy, even to these points of media. It's like, okay, the CBC cannot keep up on its own because it's utter trash.
It's useless. It should sink, and it should just sink to the bottom of the ocean.
Their content is if they can't survive in the marketplace, it's not on the taxpayers in order to keep their propaganda machine alive. And so you look at the bias of the CBC, they have to attack anybody other than Trudeau because Poilievre has made it very clear that he does not intend on continuing to fund these people at all. So to them, this election is literally a matter of life or death for so they have a built-in policy. And to support the Liberal Party.
But you know what? Just to add to your point, that's going to be the exact same situation for all these other smaller media platforms that are getting part of the $63 million a year. So you're going to have hundreds, thousands of small media channels that are going, look, we're on the government tit right now, and we're getting $17,000 per journalist. So you scale up your operation because you're getting more and more money to keep things going. They're gonna go, if we don't keep the Liberals in power, this is gone, and that's it. We're out of business. So you're going to have this entire army that's going to be pushing back against the conservatives because it's life or death. Sorry, go on.
No, it's okay. And I mean, they're creating a propaganda machine top to bottom. And like, I look at this as no different than something like Pravda in the Soviet Union. It's a straight up propaganda machine. And one of the things that they put forward with all these Bill C-11s and all of this kind of stuff is, well, we're going to promote Canadian values. Well, look at the people that are in charge of these policies. They absolutely hate all of Canada and its history. So what values of Canadian, you know what they mean? It's this whole diversity.
Of course, that's what it is. It's letting more men into girls' change rooms. Fucking.
And so to them, that's a Canadian value. But then you look back at anything in Canadian history, they despise Canada, man. Why are we letting people that despise Canada tell everyone and promote Canadian values?
No, I agree. I mean, it's the same group of people now that are getting rid of Dundas Street. I mean, I did a little research on that guy. He was an abolitionist. Yeah. It's wild that we're changing it to some now like an African tribal name that's actually got some roots in what's it called?
In slavery.
Yeah, in slavery. Sorry. Yeah, that actually have some roots in slavery. And I'm like, this is wild. But that's
good luck finding any tribe in Africa that goes back hundreds of years that didn't participate in that. Because guess what? Everybody did.
Yeah.
there was nobody. We were not unique in that at all. That was actually the best part of that whole you remember that Woman King movie that came out with Viola Davis? It was all about the tribe of female African warriors.
No, I don't.
Yeah. Okay. So it was a 2-for-1. It was all about Black power and women empowerment. This movie
sounds right up my alley. Surprised I didn't see it.
But then the actual historical account, this whole woman tribe, dude. First of all, they got absolutely slaughtered in any main battle that they came up against with anybody that wasn't just sticks and stones type tribes. And second, their whole tribe was very pro-slavery. They would go frequently and enslave other tribes and stuff. So you're like, this whole narrative of being like, we are whether it be Canadians or Americans or just Western, it's Westernism in general.
Yeah.
It's like, these are the ills of humanity are being blamed on Westernism. And it's like all of their proposed solutions and the virtuous ones are guilty of the exact same crimes.
Yeah, like I keep saying, man, we live in a charade. The whole world is just make-believe now. It's absolutely insane to me that we continue to do these things.
Well, continuing on with Clown World, Liberals mandate separate hiring targets for Black and LGBT plus workers. So the Employment Equity Act in Canada, a mandated diversity initiative, requires the federal government and its contractors to establish hiring targets for women, visible minorities, Indigenous people, and individuals with disabilities. Recently, Labor Minister proposed expanding these targets to include Black people and the LGBTQ plus community, which I disagree with that term, but based on recommendations from a 500-page task force report led by McGill University law professor Adele Blackett. Despite concerns of resembling a quota system, the report emphasizes that the Employment Equity Act does not impose quotas and denies the existence of quote-unquote reverse discrimination in Canadian equality law. The task force argues that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms protects affirmative action, but critics contend that this approach can lead to exclusionary identity-based hiring.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of affirmative action. I'm just not. I believe very much in a meritocracy. You know, I think, you look at a firefighter, for example, it's a government worker. If my house is on fire and I'm in there and I need to be saved, I don't care what color they are. I don't care what gender they are. I care that they can carry my ass out of the house. I'm 180 pounds, dead weight. Can you get the job done? I don't give a fuck about affirmative action when it comes to stuff like that. Same when it comes to a lot of other things within really anything. Like, this is all federal government stuff. Police force, I feel the same way. Can you get the job done? I believe that a lot of those things should be done based on like blind testing with numbers. Can you meet your numbers? Can you pass the psych exams? Great, you're good to go. Without seeing the individual, I'm really good with that. I think that's great. That's based on merit. I mean, imagine taking this idea and bringing it to like, the Toronto Blue Jays. Like, are you kidding me? That whole thing, everybody, the way you get paid and the way you get in is only based on merit. So why would we play this game? Now, people will tell you play this game because of systemic racism. Now, I'm not pretending like these things don't exist. We've had problems and there's good examples of what these things have created in different pockets, right? Now, Canada hasn't really participated in a lot of this stuff for a very long time. We've had a very equal society for our entire lives. Doesn't mean there's not bad instances where people act terribly. That happens all the time. There's always going to be bad actors, right? So I'm not taking away from that. I'm not saying that those things aren't real, but I'm saying how the systemic problem works within society has, in a lot of ways, disintegrated over the last 30, 40 years, maybe more. So they're doing these things to try to right these wrongs. But here's the problem. If you want to fix those things, you have to fix them from where they start. So you have to fix the foundational problem. You have to get to this when kids are in kindergarten or younger. That's when you need to start improve. So if you implement a good solution, it starts there and then it works its way out. That doesn't mean that you don't change the way society behaves to make these things better and to improve the situation. But when you're just giving jobs to people because of tokenism or because of the color of their skin, and that's essentially what this is. They're saying you need to make these hires. It doesn't matter about merit. You need to make these hires, which is kind of reverse discrimination. I get it. Based on where these people are from, the color of their skin, and now their sexual preference, which I'm going to get to in a minute. That's real weird. What you're doing is you're not actually making the situation any better today. What you're doing is you're making all these organizations perform much less efficient because the solution, like I said, goes all the way back to the kid in kindergarten. You start fixing whatever you think the problem is back then so that things are equal as this generation grows. That's how you actually effectively fix these problems. But just throwing people into jobs because of the color of their skin to fix the problem, it actually just creates resentment in society. People think that sometimes they're just there because of the color of their skin and not because of merit, which in a lot of cases is not the truth. A lot of cases, these people are excellent at their job and should have it, but now you create this divide. A
lot of people actually even... like to your point about where you make it a little bit skeptical as to whether somebody is there due to their competence or not. The people who are in favor of affirmative action will argue against that point, being like, oh, well, everybody's competent. But then look at what happened with Clarence Thomas down in America. All of those people, when he started repealing affirmative action laws or voting in favor of them, leading the horse on that, they immediately turned to him and said, you wouldn't be where you are without affirmative action. So they're making their own case. They're making the case against themselves at that point where you do start to go, okay, well, are we in a meritocracy or are you only there because of your skin color? And they'll throw that it shows that they'll throw those very principles that they say they stand for out the window if they can use those exact same situations to weaponize it against somebody.
Exactly. And I mean, you see this sort of at like, I think Harvard's a good example. They make it harder for, it was actually the Asian population that actually performed much better than everybody else. So they created these different sets of standards. It wasn't white people. So now they're letting I believe they were letting a lot more black people in with much lower, under much lower merit than they were Asian people. And you look at this and you're going, how is this fair to the people that worked so hard to get there, right? Why are they having to suffer from this? Why is someone from Japan or China even they can't get into school over here because of some problem that you think you're fixing in America? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think it breeds, like I said, it breeds resentment. It breeds inefficiency. It kind of breeds a lackluster society in a lot of ways. It's not a good way to integrate. People are not happy about that. If you're like, what do you think happens? Let's say you grew up your whole life. Like you and I have grown up in our 30s, ish. We've kind of grown up and our whole lives, like this is the way I've seen things. I'll be honest with you. I've never really cared where anybody was from or what they were into. I just don't give a fuck. Like I don't care enough about anybody else to really give a fuck. I'm like, I don't care what color your skin is. I don't care what you're sexually attracted to. I don't fucking care at all. I like you if I like you. I don't if I don't. That's the end of it. That's how I've always seen things. I think everybody's capable. I think we can all accomplish a lot. That's how I see it. But now imagine, like I work for myself, so it's a little different. But imagine now you and I have worked neck and neck and, I've always been a little smarter than you, right? And then you get the job though, because you're gay. I don't. How do I now feel about that community? My whole life, I've never had any problem with them at all. But now we're saying this is exactly why you get the job and I don't. How do people start feeling about that community? You start resenting them. This is just going to create a bigger divide. This is not the fucking solution. And when it comes to the LGBT community, we have, I'm pretty sure, actually, no, we do. We have, the Human Rights Commission has got some pretty strict laws against asking people their sexual preference, whether they're in an interview or they're an employee. So how are you identifying whether people are a part of the LGBTQ community? And to that point, how are you verifying it? Because now you're incentivizing people to be a part of the community, to leverage it so that they're in this protected class so they can get the job. Because now when you and I go to get the job, I'm going to give you a kiss on the mouth. Now we're both gay. Now who gets the job? Now who gets it? You know what I mean? So you're creating this really weird system where you can't verify it. You shouldn't be doing it. And honestly, the next thing they said they were going to do is they were going to start using religious exemptions. This is getting wild. For employment, how are you going to verify any of this? It's insane. We've just gotten too far. The state, the government, is far too involved in our lives. And this is just such a prime example of it.
Well, to me, it's funny that they say they deny the existence of reverse discrimination. You can't discriminate in favor of something, and that's what affirmative action is, without discriminating against something. Dude, this is such doublethink. This is doublethink territory, top to bottom.
But they said it wasn't the case, and they said there was no quota, so that means it's not the case, and there's no quotas.
Yeah.
All right, man.
And dude, controversial opinion, I'm pro-discrimination. You have to discriminate, but discriminate on the basis of competence in character.
Merit.
Yes. Not on the base, like we have to discriminate. That's what the hiring policy is I'm trying to discriminate.
Exactly. You know what? Have we forgotten what it means to go to a job interview where there's 100 people there fighting for the same job? The whole thing is based on a discriminatory process on merit. That's the whole fucking idea. Wow, good point. Thanks for that.
Yeah. But yeah,
just really pulled it all together for me. Thanks.
Dude, it's just top to bottom insanity. And like do you remember when the New York Orchestra stopped? So they implemented, out of fear of having unequal hiring practices, they implemented blind auditions. So the people deciding who would become part of the orchestra could no longer see the person.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about with the number thing. Yeah,
okay,
I'm like, okay, cool. Just go on performance.
And then they still didn't get it, and they still realized that, oh, we're not getting an equal amount of representation coming through here, even just on the basis of, I can't tell who this person is, just how good are they playing. So they said, you know what? Blind auditions are now discriminatory and they're racist and all this kind of stuff. And this is the crux of this issue is people not understanding the difference between equality and equity, which, given equal opportunity, you will never have equal outcomes, ever.
No chance.
Going back to the orchestra, maybe the reason that you don't see a lot of Black people in the New York City Orchestra is because, I don't know, when was the last time I saw people in Harlem sitting around with their double basses on the street?
And that's my point about fixing the problem from the beginning. If you want to fix the problem, you have to if you want to take government resources, that's where you go fix it. You fix it at that age so that people grow up with the same opportunities, not the same outcome, but the same opportunity. If equal opportunity can exist more at a younger age, a lot of these problems solve themselves. That's how you fix this. You don't do it by dividing society.
But to me, I don't even look at that as a problem. If certain cultures go towards certain things more than one or another, why is that a problem?
In this particular case, I don't disagree with you. I mean it more in instances where it is a problem with opportunity. That's actually what I was saying. But yes, I agree. You shouldn't force people to play baseball if they want to, drive a monster truck. I don't know why I went with those two things. But I mean, I just feel like they wouldn't the one person would do one, not the other. Anyway, that's my point. I totally agree with you. But I meant it more in the sense of, when it is a real problem that needs to be fixed, that's where you start it.
Yeah. And my favorite quote on this whole topic that just illuminates how stupid this whole conversation about equality versus equity is, which, again, equity is thinking that the outcomes should be the same. That's different than equality of opportunity is a quote from Thomas Sowell, where he says, "There's no such thing as equality. Even the same man is not equal to himself on different days." And it's like,
what a great quote.
it is.
What a great
It's the best.
quote.
It's like, I am actually not nearly, or I'm a lot more competent now than I was a year ago. Like, I am not equal to my old self.
Oh, dude, catch me if I've had 4 hours of sleep versus 8.
Yeah.
Totally different person.
Yeah, exactly. So the whole concept of this, we need equal representation across the board, is just fucking stupid. Like, you don't hear anybody fighting for equality of representation in teaching professions and HR professions or and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, you're just like, it's they look at where the power centers are, where they think power resides.
That's where they want to
that's where
implement
they
it.
want the
You're right.
implementation. Final topic of the day here: is the American dream a thing of the past? The American dream is financially out of reach for most U.S. families. The traditional middle-class lifestyle, including factors like marriage, homeownership, raising 2 children, and owning a pet, costs an estimated $3.4 million over a person's lifetime. The average lifetime earnings for a U.S. worker fall short at $2.3 million. This discrepancy highlights the financial challenges faced by middle-class families, considering rising costs of food, tuition, and living expenses. The breakdown includes expenses such as raising 2 children, costing just over $500,000, home ownership with an $800,000 mortgage, and a wedding with an average cost of $35,000. Other lifetime expenses like cars, health insurance, retirement, and funeral contribute to the staggering total of $3.5 million. This analysis underscores the lack of financial stability for middle-class families in the face of inflation and higher interest rates. Now, I made a video last week talking about how a lot of people forecast that we're entering into a dystopia. And I said, if you open your eyes, you'll realize we're already in one. Yeah. And you look at all of this kind of stuff, whether it's home ownership, of people not being able to even be financially capable of starting a family or having a home. I remember reading a stat it's something like the average couple now earns as much adjusted for inflation as a single man did over 100 years ago. And you factor in all of these other issues that we're seeing, like whether it be overdoses, like the number one killing of people aged 18 to 45 now is fentanyl. Divorce rates are skyrocketing. Child rates are plummeting. We're relying on immigration from third world countries in order to avoid population collapse here. Like, I just look at this and go, are we already in the end time? Like, it's not even a matter of keeping it at bay or avoiding it. It's like, it's a matter of how fast does it happen now. To me, it's starting to seem like that.
I have a little more optimistic perspective than you, I think, in most cases.
Classic.
There's been some big problems that have happened since the 70s, and the big disparity you have is when the increase of minimum wage and inflation became so far apart, right? And then that's been a really big problem. So first of all, there's no really good reason why they drive inflation. There's not. It just kind of fucks up the economy. They say that it makes sense, but at the end of the day, it really doesn't.
It's an invisible tax.
Exactly. It doesn't add up. That's exactly what it is. Now, because there's this disparity and they didn't really keep up, that's one big problem. That created a really big issue because your buying power diminishes so dramatically over the years. Now, another thing that happens is in society, we tend to adjust the cost of living based on our birth rate. And what I mean by that is, in the 50s, the birth rate was, I believe it was still over 2 in America and in Canada. So a family was having 2 to 3 kids or more. And then what happens now is it's declined so much that what society does, and it's weird how the mechanism works, but when most families are having only one child, the cost of living and the wages and the inflation, they all kind of increase to make it so that you can just afford to have one kid, right? So that's another thing that's kind of happened is the cost of living has increased, but it's become too big a problem to actually be able to afford to have 2 kids. So that's one of the things that I think is also kind of killing the American dream, because how do you actually recover from these things? And actually, before I say that, I would say that over the last few years since COVID, life has become so expensive that disparity has grown so much that now it's cost prohibitive to even have one child, right? So now a lot of people are just like, hey, look, yeah, times are tough. Hey, it's crazy to have a kid right now. The world's on fire. Look, the world's always on fire, right? But the reality is, how do people afford to have kids if they can't afford a home? They can't afford, like, if the average mortgage payment in Canada right now is 66% of a family's income and the rest of it goes to the government for taxes, how do you afford to have a kid that according to those statistics, costs $250,000? If you look at it in Canadian numbers, I believe it's about $350,000 to have a kid until they're 17 right now. So how do you, it's not about wanting to do it. It's how can you afford to? And now I think they're at this point now where a lot of families are just going, we can't even have kids. That's how far away we've gotten from the American dream of dad works, have a car, have a house, have a few kids, things are good. So we've gotten a long way away from that. Now, do I think we can ever get back to it? I think there's a way to get back to it. I just don't know what the fallout looks like to get there, because you have to start bridging the gap between earnings and cost of living, right? And to do that, you have to take a lot of wealth away from a lot of people. So what does that look like? And that's diminishing the price of homes. But you can do that by increasing volume of homes. You can do this by flooding the market with enough goods that you don't kind of run into the same. People can buy more for less. You're going to take things away from people. But how else do you correct course here? You know what I mean? I don't really have a good answer, actually. I wish that I did.
I think the president of Argentina does.
Cut everything. Yeah. Cut everything.
You were talking about the 1970s when the inflation started to take off compared to minimum wage. A couple of things happened in the 1970s as well. The net worth of the top 1% earners started drastically increasing compared to the bottom 99% decreasing rapidly, and it literally inversed. They were growing side by side, and then they went like this. And you have to ask, what started being put in place in the 1970s? Well, there's two big things. A lot of social spending. Yeah. That is when social spending started going through the roof. This idea that the government can start making up for inequities.
Trudeau that they're the people actually put in a lot of these things.
Yeah,
up here,
and even down in America too. It was the creation of the welfare state happened in the 1970s, and then the second bit too, and this is American specific, but the dissolution of the gold standard.
Yeah, that was a big problem.
Yeah, so man, you look at these and you go, okay, so government intervention and seems to be the massive correlation between all of these issues. Even if you look at the industries that the government subsidizes compared to industries that they don't. So for instance, the costs of things like electronics, computers, TVs, all of that has plummeted. None of those are subsidized by the government, but you look at the cost of things that the government does subsidize, which is things like education, housing, all of these types of industries. Those costs have gone through the roof. And so I sit here and I go, why are we pretending that the government can fix any of the problems that it seems like they created?
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I think the solution in a lot of ways is smaller government. They're our biggest burden. The government was created to try to help society become better, to support them, to make sure the roads were there, the lights were there, the garbage was taken away, the snow's removed, stuff that's municipal mainly. But the idea was to help society grow. But now it's like they're on the opposite team. You ever try to open a small business in this country, you'll know exactly what I mean. You ever try to get, you ever opening up, like open restaurants, obviously. So you ever try to work with the city and trying to get your permits done and get everything done? Holy shit, dude, you'll lose years. You have to pay hundreds of thousands for parking. Like, dude, they're doing nothing but trying to take more and more money from your pocket and making it harder for you to survive. They're not doing anything to help you whatsoever. So, I mean, I think that is actually a very reasonable solution, is to have a much, much smaller government, have it go back to the way it used to be. Help society, don't be its biggest burden. One of the other things too, that happened, and I think it might have really started up in the 70s, was a lot of women started going back to work. And I'm for women working and doing whatever they want to do whenever they want. But what also happened at this time, it was the same thing with the adjustment in children. When women started working, things started costing more. The cost of living went up because now you had two people in the family working to bring income. So once that went up, the cost of living went up, and then everyone was still kind of at par. So it's one of those other things that I think made it harder, even though I think it's a positive thing, I think the government used it against us to make it harder to have the American dream. So I mean, yeah, I like your solution though of smaller government's a really good place to start.
Yeah, and one of the in my dystopia video, because I do tend to take the more grim look on things
Yeah,
than you.
you're definitely darker than I am. Yeah,
But-
you're like evil John. I don't know if you watch Community, but that's you.
Yeah, but I did my solution too on the other side is not just small government, because again, these things are always just solutions placed on the problem is out there and the fix is then out there. Something else needs to happen outside. It's like I think a massive issue is the loss of individual power, of people thinking that they cannot become powerful on their own. And that was the whole idea that I put at that end of that video is like, look, things are bad. I do believe that we're in a dystopia, but the true way out of it is for us as individuals to take on like radical responsibility for our own lives, around those around us. And then you can become an inspiration to those people to pull themselves out of it. It's even something I see. I'm sure you've dealt with it similarly, where 2 years ago when COVID hit, I lost everything, and instead I doubled down. I said, okay, I'm going to start my own thing here now. Now I've built a business that has paid me more than any job ever did. And I've started to see friends in that circle go like, okay, you know what? I need to start picking my shit up. Nobody's going to come in here and save things for me. Like it's on me. And so I do think that like individual responsibility is the way out of this, because even if you look at what a collective is like a collective is a group of individuals. So the collective can only be as strong or as good as the individuals are.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. I think that there needs to be a lot more individual responsibility, people getting away from depending on the government for their solutions, because all they do is make things worse. But I think getting them to realize that is going to be the hard part, right? Because you've got these people like Trudeau right now that like, I'm going to do a car video on it. Actually, he said he was going to be running again for prime minister. And then he went on this tirade for 20, 30 seconds. And he just said everything he said was objectively false. Every single thing he said. He's going to fight for all these things, and he's going to fight for the middle class, an economy that works for everybody, and he's going to keep doing this and fight for that. And I'm like, everything you said is not only objectively false, you made them all worse. They're all in much worse shape because of the things that you did. And this goes back to our original conversation about controlling the media. When he controls the media, that's the only side people get. They go, well, Trudeau's the one fixing all these problems. We need him here because things are so bad right now. Guys, he's been in power for 8 or 9 years. It's bad because of what this guy did. And I think we need to get people to that point, which is tough because people associate so much with their political opinions that they're not willing to see the other side of it. They just they put blinders on, right? And they want to support their side because there's so much to lose now because everything's politicized when the other party's in power, and I think that makes it tough. I think those are the tools they use to make sure that they can keep society suppressed, but I agree with you. I mean, my whole life, I've always been a go-getter. That's just who I've been. I fucked up more things than I've won at, for sure. I mean, that's how it goes when you do these kinds of things. But the reality is, no matter how bad things get, I always know that I'm going to figure it out. Always. It's just a matter of being able to sort of take that feeling or that confidence and then sort of transplant it into the majority of society so that we can kind of rise up and make some changes. Because I think you're right. If individuals did take a little more responsibility and we fought a little more for individual freedom, I think the government, the size of the government and the way the government operates would be the next thing to fall, which would then sort of give us an opportunity to kind of rebuild the American dream.
Even look through all throughout history. The times that things got infinitely better for humanity was when individualism was held as the shining virtue. So you can look at like the French Revolution birthed democracy as we know it. The Revolution of 1776 in establishing America. Like all of these things that we think of as what have created the modern world that we live in, everything that we cherish about this world that's different, because there's many similarities to civilizations of the past, but ours is very unique in that respect for individualism. And life got infinitely better every single time that we doubled down on that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's definitely the path that we need to walk.
Yep. I think it's just a matter of getting people there, but I totally agree.
Perfect. Anything else you want to add for this week there, brother?
That's it. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.